join us in due course. So we are being recorded. First of all, welcome everyone. Welcome Dario and Nikolina, our guests. It is a pleasure to host you for the Center for Advanced Studies Southeastern Europe's guest speaker series. And I know this was supposed to be, this session was supposed to be scheduled a bit earlier this year, but here we are today. So we're very happy to be together with you. I will just quickly introduce the usual house rules that we are by now all very familiar with, but always worth repeating. I will ask everyone to please, if you could keep your microphone off until the Q&A session at the end. And then, of course, if you have some comments or questions, when the time comes that you rather post and type, we'd be happy to also receive inputs that way due to interconnections or preferences. So please don't be shy. We try to have really like a friendly and informal atmosphere for conversations with our guest speakers. So I will just briefly introduce Nikolina Židek, and she will then do the honors and introduce to us Dario Brentin. Nikolina was a fellow at CAS a couple of cohorts ago, if I'm not mistaken, and she's now adjunct professor at the IE School of Global and Public Affairs since 2016. She's also a member of the research group Lugares, Marcas y Territorios de Memoria, which is translatable as Places, Marks and Territories of Memory, of the Memory Studies Nucleus at the Institute for Economic and Social Development in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And today's session is called Performing the Sanctity, the Sacred and the Profane in Croatian National Football Culture. So without further ado, Nikolina, welcome, and Dario.
Thank you very much, Valeria. Well, I would like to thank Dario for joining us and for sharing his research. I really always enjoy his writings and his presentations because he's very passionate about his topic, which is football and nationalism and identity. So it's always a pleasure to see what he's doing now. And we work together in a couple of projects, so I think that we will all enjoy his presentation today. So he's currently working at the University of Applied Sciences in Vienna, Austria, and before that he was working at the Center for Southeast European Studies in Graz, at the University of Graz, and he has always been working on the topics of sport and national identity in post-Yugoslav Croatia. He obtained his master's degree in political science at East European history at the University of Vienna, and he has since then been a visiting lecturer at the CEU Budapest University and the University of Copenhagen and University of Louvain. So I would like to give a warm welcome to Dario, and without further ado, I would give him the floor.
Thank you very much, Nikolina. Thank you very much, Valeria, for the lovely introduction and for providing me the platform or the possibility to speak to the seminar series, which I have been following with great interest over the last few years. Not just the seminar series, but the work of the center itself. Our ways have crossed either sort of personally or professionally on many occasions. My family, my father comes from Rijeka, so I'm in Rijeka fairly often. I've worked, as Nikolina has said, together with her on a couple of projects, but also with Jeran Pavakovic quite closely. Yeah, so thank you very much. And also apologies for all of you who were joining last time I was supposed to present, because I bailed, I think, an hour prior to the presentation or something like that due to a family emergency, unfortunately. So thank you very much for providing me a second chance, a second opportunity to present my research. But now, without further ado, I'm just sort of gonna get into the topic of today's presentation. Valeria was I'm grateful. Well, I'm very grateful to Valeria for sharing the presentation and also being the slide moderator. So don't be surprised when I say slide in the middle of a sentence or something. Because I'm currently in London and my internet connection is a catastrophe. So also please excuse if I am gone for a second or two and do sort of make it somehow noticeable to me, shall I be gone? Nikolina, either sort of text me on WhatsApp or something, just so I know. Okay, well then, Valeria, I'd like to ask you to start the presentation, to share your screen. Yes, we're getting there. Perfect. Thank you very much. So, as said, today I'll be talking, or my topic will be, or my presentations will be on the topic of performing the sanctity, the sacred and the profane in Croatian national football culture. Slide, please. So, over the last 3 decades, numerous nationalism scholars have argued that modern sport has become one of the major rituals of popular culture that substantiates the idea of the nation as an imagined community. It's a term that we're all aware of and that we've all worked with. By encompassing social axioms, structures, norms, values, it significantly contributes to their reproduction and therefore qualifies as an integral part of society, but also contributes to the reproduction and the re-establishment and contestation of these norms, structures, and values. It is thus an integral part, as said, of a society which may be used as a means of reflecting on society. Generally, in my research, I follow Eric Dunning and Norbert Elias and their assumption that it is the knowledge about sport that provides us with the knowledge about society. The social field of sport can be thus regarded as an expression of a social cultural system and as an analytical lens through which one deconstructs social questions. I think there's sort of an interesting or important methodological issue here that many particularly journalistic views I think get wrong when they describe sport as a mirror of society. I think it really isn't. But it is thus much more a lens through which one can analyze various aspects and various aspects of society. In the case of post-Yugoslav Croatia, sports, including its interpretations, images, metaphors, rituals, and so on, has been proved to be a highly politicized form of national expression. For more than 30 years now. Moreover, Croatian sport can be described as a unique source of social knowledge, contributing significantly to the formation, establishment, and conservation of the newly emerging national identity after 1990 and 1991. As such, I see it as a prominent arena and a prism in and through which categories as nation, identity, culture, but also obviously many others can be contested, while simultaneously epitomizing their complexities. The research that I'm presenting today is based on my work in the field for now already more than a decade, in which I have observed more than 30 games of the Croatian national football team, including games at the 2016 UEFA European Championships in France and the 2018 FIFA World Cup in Russia, and the so-called homecoming celebrations both in 2016 and 18, as well as numerous further mediated open air and closed space public viewings, both in Croatia, as well as in other diasporic communities, predominantly or exclusively in Austria and Germany. Methodologically, I rely on a mix of ethnographically informed participant observation approaches and discourse analytical approaches. Slide, please. Building on Benedict Anderson's imagined community idea, Rudolf Speth points out the need of staged rituals, such as commemorations, parades, celebrations, but also sporting events, in the process of nation building and identity formation, in order for the nation to be emotionally experienced. Influenced by Roland Barthes, who in his potentially least anticipated piece of work, What is Sport?, identified modern sport's primary social function in representing a form of spectacle that offers a shared experience for the collective, I want to argue that sport, and in my case particularly football, should be examined through its ritualistic nature. Albeit Emil Durkheim's seminal work in the elementary forms of the religious life ostensibly focused on collective rituals of the Australian Aboriginal community and their functions in evoking collective effervescence, his research can be utilized for modern sport due to its roots, which display numerous characteristics of religious rituals, if not in meaning, then in form, and furthermore exhibit the ability to encompass the individual athlete and the collective audience into an expression of mutually beneficial unification. Elaborating this argument further, we can state that Durkheim, for Durkheim, the content of the symbolic system, the symbols honored, the values and beliefs represented, are described as relatively insignificant in the relation to the fact that the ritual process itself serves to join the individual to a community of moral order. It is the ritualized process in which has of greater significance than the actual content can be. For Durkheim, the essence of the ritualistic experience was presented in the power of the event to function as the nation's integrative cultural force, creating collective emotional awareness and a feeling of togetherness. Slide, please. Athletes wearing the official national kit, spectators in the stadium collectively dressed in national colors, the observers attending public viewings at city squares or parks or pubs, ultimately the individual consumer watching the game via the television or internet, men and women from different class standings, political, ethnic or religious backgrounds, and often not sharing more than the moment of common allegiance. They're engaged in a ritualistic performance of national unity, experienced through a totalizing sporting experience, or in Durkheim's terminology, collective effervescence. These states of consciousness arguably enable people to transcend their profane individuality and to construct a communal and collective sentiment, thereby fostering feelings of in-group togetherness, social cohesion, and solidarity. Slide, please. The ritual itself consists of three elements: the profane, individual member of a group or community; the sacred, moral order of the community, which can be understood as ideology in other contexts; and the symbol or totem, as a representation of the moral order and a mediator between the individual and the collective. The symbols and totems which are ritually engaged in contain a function of producing and strengthening the feeling of collective belonging, solidarity within groups, and distinguishing it against others. So through the choreographed exhibition of collective performance of national symbols, those in attendance are united in the transitory awareness of heightened national cohesion. From a Durkheimian perspective, these symbols represent totems which stand for something else, and whose employment brings up collective ideas and meanings. The increased vividness of symbolism during these experienced rituals establishes them as more memorable and their effects longer lasting, conserving the collectively shared emotional experiences. Slide, please. Through the participation in symbols, individuals narrate their affirmative relationship with the collective and the values, norms, and expectations these stand for. Through the increased visibility of symbolic representations of togetherness, national anthems, fan chants and songs, uniform clothing, national flags, emblems surrounding international sporting competitions, the sport arena is established as a field where a cohesive relation between the nation and its people is constructed. In addition, Tim Edensor identifies the performances of national identity on the sporting field as an expression of national qualities with an impact reaching far beyond the sport arena itself, whilst being a simultaneous propagator of stereotypes about self-identity and otherness. In reference to the performance of unity by groups, Durkheim notes, uttering the same cry, pronouncing the same words, or performing the same gestures in regards to these objects, individuals become and feel themselves to be in unison. Applying Durkheim to sport events, we can say that the shared experiences of a sport tournament or game, the performative use of resonant symbols, dramatic visualization, and embedded emotions, unite participants in a spatially dispersed imagined community, visually connected through new media forms as television or the internet, and temporarily bounded by the duration of a match, of a celebration, or a tournament. Slide, please. In order to understand and situate the significance of the national football team within the contemporary Croatian society, one has to illuminate the socio-cultural construction of the Vatrani, the so-called fiery ones, the name the national team is predominantly called by throughout the 1990s and beyond. The country's first democratically elected president, Franjo Tuđman, once famously stated that after war, sport is the first thing by which you can distinguish nations, and as such a salient national habitus code. It indeed needs close monitoring and political guidance. During the rule of Tuđman and his party in the 1990s, the HDZ, ethno-nationalist ideology became the prism through which Croatian politics of identity were conceptualized and promulgated, resulting in the dominance of ethno-nationalist narratives in almost all fields of life and everyday discourse. The essence of Croatianness had thus been constructed as ethnically pure, systematically eliminating references to the complex historical, socio-cultural, and political conditions that we have, over the years, marked the physical and conceptual terrain of Croatian identity. In such a political culture, the field of sport continuously epitomized central ideological narratives, functioning as an influential transmitter of political and symbolic messages for breaking down social reality and reconstructing it in ethnic terms. With Tuđman trying to conceptualize and foster state-building sport, or državotvorni sport, or sport, which would support the dominant state narratives, sport, and here most prominently the national football team, adopted the function of a key symbol for creating a distinctive Croatian nationhood. Croatian independence, athletes perpetually suggested and continued to suggest that competing on the nation's behalf is more than just sport. It is their duty as Croatians to fight a lofty battle for Croatia. It was their way of fighting for independence in the 1990s, their way of participating in building national identity and promoting a certain image of Croatia. Playing for the nation was and is sacred, svetinja. And then any attempt to disrespect vis-a-vis the national team's ascribed sacredness was and is sanctioned by symbolic and actual exclusion through other players, but also through a general social condemnation. This extends beyond the actual pitch and can be equally attributed to fans and actually non-fans, who are for one or another reason questioning the sanctity of the national team and thereby threatening the established moral order. Slide, please. It is the performance of a society's top athletes who compete under a country's coat of arms that can thus be portrayed as having a particular significance in symbolizing said society's identity. Similar to the construction of the mythologized narratives about the Vatrani during the 1990s, it is the dominant cult of the national team, which portrays the national team as sacred and above anything else in Croatian society. This seemingly untouchable character of sanctity applies to spectators equally to players, who are expected to act as one when Croatia is playing. Although the narrative itself is closely linked to the national football team, it transcends football per se and is equally applicable to other representative sports. The establishment of the Sanctity, or in Edward Shield's words, the sacred center of society, has been discursively constructed over the last decades since the mid-2000s. As will be shown, it was during the time that the ostensibly hegemonic cult of the national team started to become publicly questioned and contested. In response to various problems in Croatian football that have led to the above described status quo, the Vjesnik journalist Predrag Jurišić proclaimed that only the Croatian national team can unify Croatia, praising its powerful homogenizing and integrative symbolic power. Slide, please. As indicated by Ozren Bitli, the Croatian national football team was instrumental in the creation of said cult of the nation. Manifested through a mass media following, high public interest, and exuberant outbursts of joy during successful spells and international tournaments, or wins over highly rated and highly hated opponents, it would foster high levels of public identification and expressions of allegiance with their sacred heroes, or our sacred heroes, better said. The cult of the national team has to be situated in what Slaven Lerotić called the Croatian cult of the state, which emerged during Tudjman's regime and its political usage of the historical statehood narratives. Accordingly, athletes representing Croatia were not merely athletes per se, but constructed as the symbolic embodiment of the Croatian state itself. It was thus important to create a strong correlation between sporting success and state success. Since the Tudjman regime relied on historical traditionalism and the invoking of political myths and symbols, it relied on the constructed heroes. For example, the participants in the Croatian Spring of 1971, the Croatian emigres community, the Homeland War heroes, and so on and so forth. This national myth-making through sport is a way to signify positive stereotypes as moral norms, which are mobilized to advocate, shape, and generate new habits among citizenry, encouraging active participation at both a physical and an ideological level. Defining myth as a symbolic text, Zdzislav Mach elaborated the ways its surrounding narratives transmit values, norms, and patterns, essential and fundamental for a given culture. Basically, stories would tell each other about ourselves. Slide, please. The invention of the tradition, the invention of the Vatreni, to paraphrase Hobsbawm and Ranger, was initiated with the first appearance of the national selection in 1990 against the United States of America, Mexico, and Romania, where athletes functioned domestically as a mobilizing force fostering national political homogeneity, and internationally as ambassadors for Croatian independence. Throughout the duration of the Homeland War and beyond, games of the Vatreni were characterized by an alleged alleviated national awareness combined with public expressions of governmental appraisal and pro-national sentiments. Arguably one of the most striking acts unifying national symbolic imagery with the HDZ's political identity was the collective laying your hand on your heart during the intonation of the national anthem before international games, a gesture invoking Michael Billig's banal nationalism that was conceptualized as the expression of the national soul. The dignified holding of the hand on the heart during the intonation of the anthem was primarily identified as part of a particular nationalist folklore. And I quote President Tudjman here, a sign of national pride, patriotism, and furthermore Croatian history, and the manner in which our freedom was eked out commands all of those who represent the country, sportsmen, politicians, and cultural workers, to do so in the most lofty of fashions. As described above, the main attributes ascribed to Croatian athletes stereotype these in an almost exclusively positive manner. The practice of positive stereotypization has been explained by commentators as a combination of ritual, dramatization, and the level of involved emotions in a particular event, team, or individual athlete. Equally, in the case of the Vatreni, they were portrayed as guided by purely altruistic idealism, or they still are portrayed as being guided by purely altruistic idealism, and national charge, as the ultimate role models identified as being perennially motivated to represent and fight for their nation. Those of you who follow the national team or have seen a game of the national football team will know that the main cry of Croatian fans supporting the national team, often uttered at this point, is in unison to chant "Uboj, uboj za narod svoj," to battle for your people or nation in this manner. We can discuss the historical context of said cry later if we want to, and sort of go into also the debate about Za dom spremni, which has over the last several years almost disappeared from the games of the Croatian national team, but has been a very prominent chant or a point of contestation, and I'll get to that in particularly the late 2000s and early 2010s. However, the nature of the Vatreni's portrayal in mass media should stimulate the readership to form an endearing relationship on the basis of their shared experiences, practices, or ideological standpoints. Therefore, all Croats should have recognized themselves in the Vatreni by their primordial and sincere Croatianness, quoting here from Vjesnik. Their unique style of homeland football, Domovinski nogomet, established the Vatreni as a true manifestation or embodiment of almost all positive Croatian national characteristics. Slide, please. The national football team is furthermore constructed as a social field where ethnic homogeneity dominates, functioning as a potent marker of otherness and exclusion. Affirming the narrative of Croatia as the homeland of all Croats, members of national minorities and players claiming trans-ethnic identities were and are thus subsequently marginalized, silenced, or implicitly denied. Only when expressing consensual visions on Croatian nationhood and the will to assimilate, athletes who are members of national minorities are enthusiastically commended for it and included in the ethno-national imagery. Furthermore, the Vatreni can also be identified as the physical embodiment of a Croatian national identity that is seen as a transnational ethnic identity, with players from the Croatian diaspora at the very center of the national team. Something that is also reflected in the many of the flags in the stadia bearing the names of the hometowns of the fans present at the game, from Mostar to Berlin to Toronto. Following Durkheim's sporting celebrities can thus be identified as sacred, as a point of reference and moral authority to an extent to which they transcend their occupational locales to become wider influential public figures and national ambassadors. They continuously represent their nation in a totemic fashion, as Croatian post-Yugoslav identity was primarily constructed against anything perceived as Yugoslav. Athletes with a mixed ethnic background were expected to choose once and for all, and to exhibit their unconditional loyalty and commitment to the Croatian nation, or otherwise to be treated as traitors. Slide, please. The construction of a particular national identity facilitated through the Vatreni was powerfully exemplified to the 2018 FIFA World Cup. And to be fair, also by the 1998 FIFA World Cup in France, two events which with many parallels despite meaningful contextual differences. Where the national team's success was portrayed as a sublimination of national character, culture, collective will, and strength. After playing an inspiring or inspirational tournament, Croatia was only defeated in the final by the French national team, and after finishing third in 1998, suddenly was the world's vice champion in arguably the most global of all sports. In Croatia, however, the success was not perceived as any sort of a coincidence, but ascribed to a unique feeling of togetherness, motivation, and resilience uniting the team with its people, drawing them into a mutually deep horizontal comradeship, zajedništvo, or unity, were omnipresent ideological tropes during and after the World Cup. Newspapers titled for a whole month across Croatia that Croats across the homeland and from above were united in a ritualistic performance of national unity around the common and holy interest, the national team's success, end quote. The ecstatic level of intensity with which the tournament was celebrated recalls Durkheim's notion of collective effervescence to describe the essence of the ritualistic experience and the power to function as the nation's integrative cultural force. Slide, please. Over 500,000 people welcomed the national team in Zagreb upon its return from the World Cup, attributing the success to a unique Croatian spirit rather than actual skill. Commentators pointed out that sport is an integral part of the social and national life of a country. But when you don't have equal physical conditions, not to mention material conditions, there is something above that. That is the conscience, the will, and that is what our athletes have gained with the formation of Croatia, end quote. In these narratives, the nation had returned to its essence, its initial phase of unity, celebrating a spectacle of genuine patriotism only paralleled by Croatian independence in the 1990s. Unity was used as a very powerful ideological trope, but also illuminates that the establishment of moral order over questions of what is sacred and what is profane is a fought-over process. Extending Durkheim with scholars like Victor Turner, we have to add the aspect of struggle of meaning to myths and symbols with the experience of collective effervescence, which also creates in and out groups, and something we can discuss in the Q&A if there is interest. And I would just like to point out a couple, or sort of the most dominant points of ideological struggle, not just during the World Cup, but also during the World Cup and prior to that, when it comes to the construction and establishment of moral order via the Vatreni. Slide, please. The primary point of contestation can be said was the singing and performance of the far-right and polarizing musician Marko Perković Thompson at the welcoming of the heroes on Croatia's, on Zagreb's main square. Now, there is a very lengthy relationship that the Croatian national football team has with this very polarizing and nonetheless immensely popular and successful artist who is politically best to be defined within the spectrum of proto-fascism and radical nationalism. His song Lijepo li si is not only considered as Croatia's quote-unquote second national anthem, but has also been the song that has accompanied the national football team for now almost a decade. I think the first time they've played it as part of their entrance music was in 2008, and ever since then they've stuck to it. However, the huge emotional investment that also certain outgroups, considering from also looking from that perspective, have put into Croatia's successful run at the World Cup 2018 and creating this feeling of unity, were very quickly put into an outgroup position again with the performance of Marko Perković Thompson at the welcoming. We could see how fragile and how very short-lived these moments of collective effervescence can actually be, with many commentators arguing exclusively or arguing already on the evening of the welcoming that the moment of unity had already passed. Slide, please. The prominent presence of Ustaša symbols and particularly the singing of Za dom spremni as a contested national symbol in Croatian football fan culture is something that has been part of this contested struggle over the sacred and the profane for now more than a decade. It is split. It has split not just the fan base of the national football team, but the Croatian society as such. All of you who follow fascist, proto-fascist, and neo-Ustaša symbolry and revisionism in Croatia today are well aware of the polarizing nature and also the polarizing identification with the actual meaning of the Dom Spremni, which was during the NDH regime, the official salute of the Croatian Ustaša, but in the argumentation of far-right and right-wing groups has regained a different meaning, a meaning of, one can, from their perspective, can be argued an anti-fascist meaning in the homeland war and the war of Croatian independence being used as a cry to battle by Croatian military forces, and particularly Croatian paramilitary forces, in their defense of Croatia and the establishment of the Croatian independence. Slide, please. A further group, and this picture is from 2016, but these narratives existed onwards, similarly in 2018, maybe with a lesser intensity, was critiques of mostly organized football fans, artists, and left-wing intellectuals refusing to be part of this unified nations over the already established moral norms, codes, and values. We see here a picture of a banner that was hoisted by the split-based Torcida during the 2016 2016 UEFA European Championship, where they wished the Croatian national team to lose every single game, putting in question not just unity, but also showing the fragility and the polarization over Croatian national fandom. We can go into detail over this fight for the sanctity, or the battle for the sanctity, where organized football fans throughout the 2010s in particular were at the very center of a paradoxic fight for further democratic involvement in Croatian football, whilst at the same time utilizing certain modes of protest that were more than just questionable, and also would openly see them use fascist, proto-fascist, and Ustaša symbolry and images. Slide, please. And lastly, another polarizing aspect of also one that questions this constructed unity of the 2018 World Cup is the politically clever, albeit as said, widely criticized exploitation of the Vatreni success by the then Croatian president Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović, who politically very clever, but in the end it showed that it wasn't enough to win her a second term. Exploited the national joy that was and exuberance in Croatia by not just traveling with the national football team, but also positioning herself as the people's president, traveling on a charter plane with other fans, being very close to the national team in the celebration, and most iconically, one can say her refusal to use an umbrella after the final whistle when it was pouring down in Moscow's Luzhniki Stadium, which resulted in numerous images as the one that is shown in the presentation. So, slide, please. And concluding, I would like to say that this paper has been strongly influenced, and my research has been strongly influenced by Durkheim's theoretical framework on rituals and their deep social meanings. Understanding modern sport as a medialized ritual, the participation in these moments of collective effervescence and the struggle over them has an integrative power for societies restoring, maintaining, and reifying their social order. Identifying the national team as a totem, the paper, or my research, understands it as inserted into social circuits of the sacred and the profane in Croatian contemporary society. By exploring the idea of Croatia's national football team being the country's most sacred institution, the goal was to indicate the intricate relationship between sport, identity, and the nation. I wanted to argue that the Croatian national team represents one of Croatia's sacred centers of society, a terminology borrowed from Edward Shields. These centers, or central value systems, are identified as sacred in the sense that they represent domains where core values and beliefs of society are discussed and established. Through examples of ritualized practices by spectators and athletes, as well as public discourse, I tried to show how deeply embedded these narratives of Croatian national identity are within Croatian national fan culture in their quest for authenticity and sacredness. In doing so, I aim to represent football and the Croatian national team as a rich cultural practice and social field, which is characterized through intense secular rituals and performances. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dario. It was very, very interesting as always. I don't know if anyone has any questions, or should I open with mine? I'm sorry, I have a dog chewing on a plastic bottle there. This time you focused on national team, and now that we're practically, well, it's in a couple of weeks, the World Cup in Qatar is going to start, which is problematic in itself, but that's another story. I wanted to ask you, since you've dedicated practically all your research to football, have you observed some reconfigurations over time when it comes to the perception of the national team and different World Cups? And well, of course, it depends on the results, because 1998 and 2018 were the most important ones. But have you maybe observed some reconfigurations over time of the perception of the national team or the public discourse around national team and the national unity?
Yeah, I would sort of argue that it goes in waves, and it can thus also be attributed to any other potential representative sport. The function that football, or sort of the national football fan culture, has in the creation of Croatian national identity can be equally assigned to other sports. And one sort of particular, very sporting element that tends to be neglected here is the sheer fact of success. Without actual success and without sort of the recognition of success, the potential power of both integrative, homogenizing, but also promotional in an international sense become very limited. But it also shows that the sport per se, or football per se, is not necessarily sort of the unit of analysis here. We can look at fairly marginalized sports in Croatian society, and athletes who became immensely internationally successful, and thus also had quite an impact on how Croatian identity to a certain extent was formed. Most notably, we can take Janica Kostelić and, let's say, Blanka Vlašić, through to very, very sort of marginalized sports in Croatian society. One in athletics, let's not call it marginalized, but it's on the international hierarchy of sports rather much lower. And so success on the one hand is I think sort of the driving force there, in combination with the fact that you have a global pyramid or a global hierarchy of sports, in which football is certainly and without question in the top echelons. Otherwise, you could also argue equally that yes, water polo is a sport that Croatia has been dominant in Europe and in the world over the last 30 years, and it is without. I don't want to argue that it does not have significance for the creation of particularly regional identities in Croatian society, but in the global context, it is certainly not comparable to the standing on football, neither in the past nor in the present.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a former water polo player. Well, handball is also one of them. Well, the sports where Croatia had most success, let's say, but this doesn't happen that much as in football. And since I know what you researched and you wrote about, can you maybe delve a little bit in depth around connection with the football fans and the war, because many of them are very big memory guardians regarding the homeland war, because they participated in the war, so they're practically both war veterans and football fans of different football teams, football clubs.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Nikolina, you know yourself that the issue there being of creating causalities. Whether someone went to war in 1990-91 because he or she, mostly he, was a football fan, or whether they went to war and happened to be a football fan as well, are two very different things. That does not necessarily mean that, particularly in organized football fan groups of the Bad Blue Boys and Torcida, there were attempts to mobilize football fans into joining particularly sort of voluntary and paramilitary formations in the early phases of the Croatian War of Independence. There were also, to a certain extent, units formed according to fan allegiances and football club allegiances. The Bad Blue Boys have their own veteran organization, for example, in Zagreb. But what is more sort of interesting to me, and what is, I think, more important there, is the way that these football fan organizations today managed to put themselves at the very center of the creation of Croatian statehood. They do see themselves as being partially responsible for the fact that Croatia as an independent state exists today, and are thus also positioning themselves at the very center of the creation of Croatian statehood. An argumentation that is obviously sort of highly ideologized and highly politicized, but it also allows them as sort of memory guardians, but also I'd say memory entrepreneurs, to a certain extent, to establish their own position in Croatian society today, and to have certain, social, cultural, financial gains from that positioning. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Sanja has a question.
Yes, thank you. What is it intrinsically that makes football so attractive? I mean, here we spoke about supporters, we spoke about the framework, cultural, civilizational, whatsoever, but players, what is it that make them so expensive? And how that is framed within the when that started? Did you go into the history of the game and how it? I know about hooligans and things that the wording, semiotics, the vast field of semiotics related to football is so important, and but what about that side of players? Like, did you look at that direction as well?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't do sort of any particularly in-depth research, but I would, for example, argue that there isn't anything intrinsic about the game of football. It has, for one or another reason, simply become historically one of the dominant global games that is played in almost every culture. The argument there is often that it is a very simple game, that it requires very few technical or technological means to be played. You need a ball and you need 2 sticks and you have a goal. Compared to other highly or sort of more technical or sort of technically needy games. It's much easily to spread this game further and sort of into, let's say, less privileged or sort of more peripheral parts, because it has been or it was a European game that became global. It was an English game that became global, partially through historically through sort of the military. I mean, this is, you know, where sports and military history are very close.
Can I challenge you there, please? Yeah. Can I challenge you there?
Please do, yeah.
Because when I see the stadium, and it's huge, it's so important, and when I'm not a fan, but then I see people with the football ball. I mean, it's a technique. It's so I don't think that it's so easy to go on with the fact that it's globally accepted as such, because we do things with our hands. We are very much into our, civilizationally speaking, doing things with legs and feet. It's not so common. I mean, there must be something more. This is why I asked you about the intrinsic value of football, and then related to I don't know, democracy whatsoever that we have. I'm not talking about the merchandising or you know, making it. Let's keep it that way. I want to challenge you that that's a game that it's more demanding and it has more into it. Speaking on technique or speaking on and why it's attractive.
No, thank you very much for I do have to say that I haven't really thought about the fact that, you know, civilizationally, what you just said, that sort of engaging in something that is done with our feet does not necessarily represent sort of the way that we have done things priorly. You know what? I will have to give that a thought. I don't really have an answer to that as to why sort of a game that was played with your feet and not with your hand, because you could equally argue, okay, why not handball? It also requires a ball and the frame. It's sort of equally not similar, but equally easy or difficult. Yeah, I'll have to give that a thought. I honestly don't have an answer for that.
Okay, I think Valeria or Gabriel wanted to have a say, and then Nicola.
Hi.
Can I?
Yeah, no, please go.
No, go ahead.
I can follow.
No, but you were first.
Yeah, sorry. I hope this does not take us elsewhere entirely, but I have like one question for like maybe clarification, and then one question that opens more to a meta-political commentary. So one would be whether, am I correct in assuming that your argument is that there is something specific around the way Croatian nationalism utilizes football, that it's not comparable to similar scenarios? Because I got somehow many moments during your presentation when I was thinking of other two countries that I know, I think well enough from first-hand living conditions, namely Italy and the UK. And I see many points of contact, but then basically, I don't know, I was just interested in maybe if you could just say a few words on what is the cutting line that you really would identify as a kind of elevator pitch. I don't need
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, and the other perhaps is also about a clarification, but it's something that I also am very interested in my own thinking, that has nothing to do with football specifically, but is to do with your expression that you used several times in the presentation around proto-fascism. And I was maybe going to ask you where you take that expression from. Is it a framework that you actually use through some other commentators, or whether it's more like a colloquial term? And if so, maybe if we could have a small reflection around what we're actually trying to capture when we add this idea of proto-fascism to cultural rituals or expressions, or where is the line there, and what are the benefits, I suppose, in differentiating that from a full-fledged fascism, if it's a matter of the strength of the symbolic. So is it a fascism that is then more invisibilized, or is it more subtle in the way it plays with the symbolic order? Or is it less toxic or less dangerous, less violent? So I'm interested in if you could maybe share more of your own line of thinking when you explore that in the specifics of fandom and yeah.
No, great. Thank you very much. Great questions. I would not necessarily say that there is anything unique to Croatia in the way that football and football fan culture has become part of Croatian national identity. However, there are certain, and you could probably sort of hear from my presentations, I do not really sort of engage a lot with quantitative analysis. But if one has to sort of, if the way that I will also sort of very easily can sort of, to people from the quantitative side of social sciences, argue that this actually matters and comparable to other, let's say, European nations. I wouldn't know necessarily on a global scale, but to other European nations, there's two numbers that stick out, or three actually, but two that really stick out. That Croatia is alongside with Jamaica and Sweden, by far the third most successful Olympic nation in the world per capita. If you divide sort of Olympic medals and world and European championships in Olympic sports, it is the third most successful country in the world. I know there's surely a billion of methodological issues with this. I mean, it doesn't take into consideration sort of the amount of money spent on sports, etc., etc., etc. But it's sort of it's an indicator. And I also sort of always refer to them as indicators. And the second is there's several quantitative studies from Zagreb that explore, I forgot unfortunately the names of the sociologists, that explore sort of Croatian identity and Croatian identity markers. And when asked what is Croatian, or what makes you proud of being a Croatian, it is, apart from the homeland war, Croatian sport and success in Croatian sport is always either the first or the second answer, and we're talking about here more than 90%, I think 92%. And those studies, there's I think the last one that was done is 2017, but they reach back into, I think the earliest one is 2006. So it's sort of a consistent quantitative factualization of the importance of sport for Croatian identity. Now, this is, I know for other European countries, is not the fact. People are not as proud of sport as they are in Croatia. There are several reasons for that. I think that's, I mean, here, you know, that's where I'm sort of also in an area where I'm just not very confident to talk with too much authority, but the comparative element here is there's so many factors to be taken into consideration. I think the small country factor needs to be taken into consideration. The post-conflict factor needs to be taken into consideration. The post-socialist factor has to be taken into consideration. So if anything, I would sort of compare Croatia to Taiwan and Kosovo, for example. I mean, I think between Kosovo and Croatia, there's huge, also the way that sport and popular culture are being utilized in the creation of national identity is, I think, very much comparable. But otherwise, the modes are similar, are very, very easy. Austria has national pride in their sports, and it says something about Austrian identity. However, sort of the counter questions that I would sort of also to challenge a question like yours would be from my hand when the question comes from a more hostile place than your question came from, is to ask people whether they, no, I didn't feel that it was hostile, but at times it comes over a bit hostile from other people. I would question them whether they can talk about Croatian national identity without mentioning sports or football. I think this is utterly impossible. For other countries, I think, you know, we can discuss that, and there I think lays the suckers of it. For the usage of proto-fascist, I guess it's both a little bit of a colloquialism, but when you were talking about it, I thought about the variety of, or sort of the vividness of symbolism and the gray zones that are being explored. And let's take a very, very, it's not a banal example, but the Croatian coat of arms with the first field being white. Whether this is already fascist or whether this is proto-fascist. In legal terms, if it's not the coat of arms with the Ustasha U and sort of the entire Ustasha symbolry, it is not an Ustasha flag, because for a brief period of time, please correct me, those of you who know it better, in 1990, for I think 3 months in 1990, it was also the official flag of independent Croatia. So how do you position sort of the usage of this flag, which is widely used still widely used in stadia? Is this, you know, is this already fascist, or is this proto-fascist? I think that, you know, when you were saying it's proto-fascism, for me sort of describes this gray area where one is playing with sort of these aspects of symbolism and the fascist symbolry, and now I'm talking for the Croatian football fan culture context, and not beyond. Whilst the usage of clearly established fascist symbolry, that's where I would then say this is you know, fascist or Ustasha symbolry. I know that, you know, it's a gray zone that does not really, it doesn't make it very tangible what I just said. You know, it's not really, so I don't really have a methodological thinking behind it. I'm just sort of riffing here on the spot. But maybe you're right, and I should sort of take a little bit more care when using these kind of terms, and not just using them colloquially, and actually give a little bit more thought into what symbols, you know, can be described as fascist or as proto-fascist.
Thank you very much, Dario. Nicola?
Yeah. Thanks for this very interesting talk. As a not football fan, I would like to address one specific, let's say, perspective, and that's the gender perspective of the thing, and specifically the LGBT point. I mean, personally, as I said, I don't like football, but also for one reason, as a member of LGBT community, I don't feel comfortable quite often in the football environment. I don't want to generalize, but so my question is a bit, if you found during your research, your long research, I assume, this to be an important element, this topic of LGBT and queer life to be discussed, because it's always surprising in almost every country how hidden being gay and being lesbian is, or being queer is in football. And so I think this should be also in the research addressed more than it's been done so far, but I'm not a specialist, probably I'm wrong. So I'm very curious to hear what you have to say on this. Thanks.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're not all too wrong. So I've dealt a little bit with the question of gender, but not made it sort of a primary category of analysis in my own work. Unfortunately, I would say that gender has, as much as this topic per se in Croatia, it has attracted some interest, particularly sort of during the 1990s. You had a couple of sociologists, or several sociologists who've done amazing work on football fandom, hooliganism, national identity. And that got reinvigorated in the late 2010s and ever since, with, again, a couple of anthropologists and a couple of sociologists to deal with that. Unfortunately, so the perspectives of gender or LGBTQI plus communities in sport is still one that is exclusively looked at through the prism of discrimination, but not through any other lens to sort of analyze the existing, non-existing, hidden lives and realities of LGBTQI plus people in I'd say post-Yugoslav sport, in Balkan sport in particular, sort of in general, I would assume. It's not just, I mean, you can sort of take a step back. That's why I'm sort of, you know, this idea of football being a mirror of society, well, or the stadium being a mirror of society. Well, not really. The stadium itself is male, it's young, it's you know, it's, I'd say, at the games of the national team, still 85–80% men and only 20% women. Maybe even less, depending on whether it's traveling fans or whether it's an away game. So no, it's a way through, you know, you can then look at masculinities, femininities, patriarchal structures, the way that football has been defined as a male sport, a male game, what it means to be a feminized athlete, etc., etc. So all these things, I think that there's, you know, an array of potential explorations that should all be addressed in, and I'm inviting every single sort of young sociologist, political scientist to have a look at that. It's a field to be discussed. I always, I don't know, maybe if somebody has heard me speak somewhere else before, I always, because I sound like a broken record. So coming from nationalism studies, and sort of this is my background, I'm always surprised to what an extent, even in nationalism studies, which is already a sub or a niche field in its own way, to what extent sport has become an even further niche field in that manner. And then if you look at the two sort of main international conferences in nationalism studies, which is Nationality Studies Association in the US and Nations and Nationalism, their conference in the UK. Usually, last year in New York at ASN, I think there were 180 panels. So because it was online, so it was huge. And there was one paper on sports. If you compare that to, and I don't want to see that as understood as a criticism, if you compare that to the roughly 40 papers on ethnomusicology, I find that to be sort of in a certain imbalance. Not to say that music isn't important, but you know, sport is important as well. So it's still sort of a widely under-researched field, and I sort of urge any sort of young scholar to sort of go and look into it. And gender is sort of certainly one that's, I mean, and looking sort of at these newly establishing fields of study, I think post-colonial and race studies in sport in the Balkans is, you know, it's out there, just, you know, somebody has to do it. But yeah, thank you very much for your intervention.
Thank you very much, Dario. Well, I don't know if I qualify as a young scholar.
Oh, of course you do.
But I mentioned my recent research, and since I always see candles of football fans at Pavelić's grave, Hajduk, White Boys, Bad Blue Boys. I would like to just a final question about the extreme rightist forces and the party identification of football club fans recently in Croatia. If you have any knowledge about it, then maybe we can write a paper together in the future.
Of course we can. No, the thing, I think Paul Stubbs, who most of you will know, and Andrew Hodges wrote, I mean, it's been several years, 2014, but they wrote a fantastic paper on the paradoxes of politicization of football fans in Croatia, where they spoke about these parallel existence of, on the one hand, which what I also mentioned, so the push for democratization in Croatian sport, in terms of sort of fighting against corruption, fighting against nepotism, etc., etc. That exists in parallel with the open exhibition of fascist symmetry, of racism, and other forms of discrimination on the basis of gender or ethnicity. Unfortunately, you know, the field of organized football fans. Once you get into sort of this sociological sort of methodological debate in sociology, how to approach the study of organized football fans, it becomes a very difficult terrain to maneuver for obvious reasons. Luckily, in Croatia, we do have Marko Mustapić and Benjamin Parasović, who are sort of not just fantastic scholars, but I've also been involved with Torcida and Naš Hajduk and Hajduk Split for probably their entire lifetime. So we do have very, very good qualitative data. I think they just finished, it was part of a Horizon project. They finished on youth and politics or politicization, where they did sort of 60 Hajduk Split games with the Torcida and loads of in-depth interviews. But unfortunately, they didn't really focus on radicalization. They focused more on this participatory grassroots democratization movements within football fan groups. So yeah, I think the lowest common denominator for organized football fan groups in Croatia is still Croatian national patriotism. However this is exhibited is it depends. You know, it's situational. But the openness towards the exhibition of fascist symmetry is certainly there. And there isn't, I mean, the self-understanding of all the significant major organized football fan groups is certainly right to the center, which would not, I mean, it is open towards the right and closed sharp towards anything that is considered left or left-leaning, apart from this sort of modes of operation and political interference when it comes to how to take over your own club or re-establish power over your own club, when they sort of take modes of operandi from actually traditionally leftist political movements.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I don't know if anyone has any questions, no. Well, thank you very much, Dario, for an excellent presentation, as always. I learned a lot. I took a lot of notes. And thanks everyone for coming to this seminar today. And I don't know if Valeria wants to say something.
No, again, thank you, Dario. It was a really great conversation and lecture. I also learned a lot. Thanks everyone who stayed with us. And just to reiterate, the video might become available on YouTube, the channel for the Center for Advanced Studies, Southeastern Europe. Although we might need to check because of the usage of some images might be something to sort out. But nonetheless, I think we will see each other not next week, but the week after next. Again, for those who want to connect with us. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.